Hey guys, happy Monday. We are back again for week number 7. So this week is a little bit different. We have a new schedule that came out because, as I had stated last week, with the new calendar that came out from the governor and from Dr. Bryce, where they inserted virtual learning days, for you to get extra help with your teachers or to catch up on your work. We were going to be missing at least one math class a week because of the days that those days fell on. So Dr. Burns and administration came up with this new schedule. So we only have math today, this week. So Tuesday you have LA. Wednesday is a day off for you guys. Thursday is your specials day and your homeroom advisory day. And Friday is that virtual learning day. So I had to change my plan a little bit because with this 3-day rotation and the days off, we don't have that many math classes left. And here's what I decided to do. So today you're going to learn how to use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic function. So we already did factoring, completing the square, and today you'll learn the third and final method for solving a quadratic. So what I'm going to do is there is a study guide that is also posted on Google Classroom. It's attached to where you access the document for the lesson plan for today. And that is going to help you prepare or practice or study for your quiz that will be next Monday. So today is the 4th. May the 4th be with you. I couldn't help it. So today is the 4th. So your quiz will be on May 11th. So in a week. So you have this week, especially like Wednesday when you don't have any classes scheduled, and specifically Friday, where I believe it's that first 9 to 9:45 period of time where it's specifically math, but I will be around all day. Just like I'm around all day Tuesday. Wednesday, I'm not around in the morning because the teachers have professional development. So we have to attend webinars and things like that, to enhance our teaching and collaborate and things like that. So I won't be available Wednesday morning, but Wednesday afternoon, all day Thursday, and all day Friday, I will be available for you. So we're going to go through that third method today. You're going to practice, as you need and check your answers. I will post that second video going through the practice problems, like 4 of the practice problems, in case you need more practice or you have a question with one of them. And then there will be another Flipgrid where you talk me through solving it using the quadratic formula. Up until this point, I haven't seen many mistakes at all with solving using factoring and completing the squares. So hopefully that carries over to the quadratic formula. All right, so you will definitely need a calculator for the quadratic formula, unless you have a calculator in your brain, which some of you might. But I need a calculator for the quadratic formula, and you'll see why. All right, so let's turn on the doc cam, and if you could update your table of contents. So we're adding in today the quadratic formula, and that's going to be on my page 78. And then if you could turn to your page 78 and title it, we will get started. So there are not many steps that you need to remember when going through the quadratic formula. You need to memorize the formula. After you do it so many times, it's almost like second nature. So the only thing you need to remember is that the quadratic needs to, that says 2, be set equal to 0. So there are two methods where you need all of the terms on one side of your equation and it needs to be equal to 0. So that is factoring and the quadratic formula. The only one where you don't is completing the square. So factoring and the quadratic formula, they need to be equal to 0. So I'm basically going to give you the quadratic formula, and then we're going to go through how you use it to solve the quadratic. So the formula. Sorry, my dogs are barking. Cody. So we have negative b plus or minus the square root negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and all of that is divided by 2 times a. Okay, so here is your formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is divided by 2a. Okay, so basically what you want to do, just like all the other examples that we did, you want to identify your a, b, and c values. So step 1 would be identify a, b, and c values after you made sure that your quadratic is equal to 0. So technically, this would be like your step 1, and this would technically be, sorry about that, your step 2. So the quadratic needs to be set equal to 0. You make sure, and then after you do that, you identify your a, b, and c values. So let's look at the example that we're going to use to go through this. So let's work with the quadratic 8m squared plus 18m plus 9 equals 0. Okay, so it's set equal to 0. Great, we don't need to do anything in that case. So now step 2, identify your a, b, and c values. So my a value is 8, my b value is 18, and my c value is 9. So from here, step 3 is basically the last step as well. You want to substitute your values into the formula and simplify. So I will lead you through that and point out where there are some areas where students make the most mistakes. Okay, so this is the first area where students might make mistakes. So we have, and this is all x equals, because that's what you're solving for. You're solving for x. No matter if we're using m's or we're using n's, what we're doing is we're finding where that parabola crosses your x-axis. So you might see it where it says x equals, and then your quadratic formula. So negative b, which is 18, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times A, which is 8, times C, which is 9. And this is another area over 2 times A, which is 8. Okay? So this is the first area where students make mistakes, especially if the B value is negative, which we will get to in a future example. So that's the first area. And the second area is when you do minus 4 times A times C. Typically, if A or C is negative, that's another area where there's a problem. And then divided by 2 times A. It's the whole quadratic that's divided by 2 times A. Okay, so we just have to be really careful when we simplify. So let's start simplifying. So I have x is equal to negative 18 plus or minus the square root. So this is where I need my calculator because I don't know 18 squared. So it's 324 minus 4 times A times C. So 4 times 8 times 9, which is 288, over 2 times 8, which is 16. Okay, so we've simplified inside here, but we can still simplify more. So x is equal to negative 18 plus or minus the square root. So 324 minus 288 is 36. And that's over 16. So 36 is a perfect square. So I'm going to continue to simplify. So x is equal to negative 18 plus or minus 6, which is the square root of 36, divided by 16. Okay, so now we can break that up. So we have negative 18 plus 6 divided by 16. And then we have negative 18 minus 6 divided by 16. So negative 18 plus 6 is negative 12 over 16, which can simplify further, right? I can divide both of those by 4. So negative 3/4. So that's one root. And then negative 18 minus 6 is negative 24. And that's over 16. So negative 24 over 16 can also be simplified further. So if I divide both of those by 8, I get negative 3/4. So what this tells me is, since your roots are the same, I just want to make sure I did this right. So negative 18 plus 6, that's negative 12 over 16. 12 divided by 4 is negative 3/4. Negative 18 minus 6, negative 24, yeah. And then 24 divided, oh, I did 16 divided by 8 is 4. I was like, why am I getting the same answer? Oh, Greenway, negative 3/2. Okay, I'm glad I checked my math. Sorry, simplistic mistake there. So when I simplified my fraction here, I did divided by 8 for both of those. And for some reason in my head, I was dividing by 4. So that's where I got the 4 from. So 16 divided by 8 is 2, so negative 3/2. Let's say you did get negative 3/4 and negative 3/4 though. that would just mean that your parabola sits on the x-axis at negative 0.75. That's all that would mean. But this means that there are two roots. Your graph crosses the x-axis at negative 0.75 and negative 1.5. That's what this means. Okay? So that's how you use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic. Yes, it takes a lot of room because you want to show all of your work. Okay? So I'm going to turn my page because I'm running out of room. So let's do example number 2. Okay. So example number 2, we have 2x squared plus 12x equals 4 minus x squared. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, remember, is to set this equal to 0. So it's not equal to 0. So I need to move both of these terms over to the other side. And I'm going to do that by adding an x squared to both sides, because that's going to cancel those terms out over there. And then I'm also going to subtract 4 from both sides. And now it'll be equal to 0. So what I now have is 3x squared plus 12x minus 4. And that now equals 0. All right, so I'm going to write my quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over or divided by 2 times a. Okay, so there's your general quadratic formula. So my a value is 3, my b value is 12, and my c value is negative 4. Alrighty, so now I can substitute that in. So I have x is equal to negative b, and b is 12. So negative 12 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 12 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 4. And all of that is divided by 2 times 3. Okay, so now I can simplify. So I have x is equal to, so I can just leave that negative 12, plus or minus the square root. So 12 squared is 144, minus. So if you write down minus, you need to treat this 4 as if it's positive. If you don't write anything yet, you can do negative 4 times 3 times negative 4, and you're going to get a positive answer. Okay? If you write down minus, you have to do 4 times 3 times negative 4, which will give you a negative answer. This minus sign is separate from that negative answer. Okay? So it depends on how you look at it. I write down minus, so now I have to do 4 times 3 times negative 4. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times negative 4 is negative 48. So minus negative 48. So do you see why that matters? This is a common mistake here because you have minus and negative. And we can't do that, right? We can't take away a negative number. So those become plus a positive. So that's why it's not going to matter. If you look at this as -4 times 3 times -4, you'll get positive 48. If you look at this as minus, now you have 4 times 3 times -4, which is -48. So either way, you're getting the right answer as long as you do that math correctly. Okay. So let's continue. All of that is divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. Now, a lot of people ask me, can I cancel out the -12 and 6? The answer is sure, but then you also need to keep this separate because this plus or minus sign here, these are two terms. Both terms are being divided by 6. It is not -2 plus or minus the square root of 144 plus 48. If you simplified, it would be -2 plus or minus the square root of 144 plus 48 divided by 6, because this is another term. And both of these terms are divisible, are being divided by 6. So I always say wait till the end to fully simplify. Okay, so let's simplify inside that radicand. So we have x is equal to -12 plus or minus. So 144 plus 48. I seriously don't trust my simple math skills right now, as you could see from the first example. So 144 plus 48 is 192. So plus the square root of 192. And both of those are divided by 6. So now you might ask, what do I do from here? Well, is there a perfect square in 192? So remember way back when we were going through this, go through your perfect squares. 4, is 192 divisible by 4? 192 cannot be divided by 4. Yes, 48. However, I know that 48 can also be divided by 4, which is another perfect square. So I don't stop at 4. So now I'm going to try 16. So 192 divided by 16 is 12. Well, there's another perfect square in 12. It's another 4. So I'm going to try 192 divided by 64, and I get 3. So 64 is my biggest perfect square in 192. So I need to take out my biggest perfect square. So I get x is equal to -12 plus or minus the square root, right? So if you want to think about this, it's like the square root of 64 times 3, right? And then the square root of 64 is 8. So you'd have 8 radical 3. Now all of that is being divided by 6. So there are, like I said, a couple of ways you can do this. So I still have to break it up. So x is equal to -12 plus 8 radical 3 over 6. I cannot combine the -12 and the 8. This is from that radicals unit that we did. In order to add or subtract radicands or radicals, you have to have the same exact radicand, and we don't. And then we get x is equal to -12 minus 8 radical 3 over 6. So you might be asking me, how can I simplify that? That's a great question. You can do, so if I do -12 divided by 6, right, I get -2. So -2 plus, now I want to look at 8/6. So I know that 8 and 6 can be divided by 2. That would give me 4. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then 6, that would give me a 3. So you would have 4 radical 3 over 3. And that's how you would write your answer. You could have divided the 12 by 3, right, to get a common denominator here, and got a -4 plus 4 radical 3 all over 3. It's the same exact answer. Okay? So this radicand over here is going to simplify to the same thing. It's just going to be minus instead of plus. So we get x is equal to -12 minus 4 radical 3 over 3. So that is your second root. That's the second solution. That's where the graph crosses the x-axis the second time. Okay? That's how you leave the answer. Now, next year or in Algebra 2, your teacher might want you to write it in decimal form, and then your calculus teacher or pre-calc or trig, they may want you to leave it in the most simplified version. So we're going to do decimal form when we go to graph, but for now, we're going to practice leaving it in its exact answer. So we're not going to round, we're not going to use decimals, okay? All right, so that was example 2. So let's look at example 3. And again, if this makes sense to you, pause the video after I write down example 3 and see how you do. So let's do 2x squared. No, yes. 2x squared minus 8x minus 5 equals 0. Okay. So again, I'm going to just write my quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2a. Okay? So our a term is 2, our b term is -8, and our c term is -5. So just also make sure you're being careful when you identify your A, B, and C values, because this is where students drop negatives sometimes. Okay, so let's substitute and then simplify. So x is equal to negative b, and b is -8, right? So I'm writing it like this. If you just wanted to write 8, that's fine. I'm just showing you why it's going to be +8. So a lot of people will put the negative sign and then say, oh, b is -8, so they just put an 8 there. Well, that would only be true if b were +8, but it's not. So we want the opposite of the b value, okay? Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So -8 squared. You need to put that in parentheses. And I know I have said this a zillion and a half times, but I will say it again. -8 squared is not equal to -8 squared. This means I want -8 as a quantity squared. This means I want -1 times 8 squared. Right? So this is a big area where students make mistakes. Okay, so let's get back to here. So -8 squared minus 4 times 2 times -5. And all of that is divided by 2 times 2. All right, so let's clean this up. So x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 64. If you do not if you are using a calculator and you do this, Greenway is going to come after you. I will come to your house, say 6 feet away from you, knock, knock, here's Mrs. Greenway, and you're in trouble. So be careful. If you're using a calculator for all of this math, you need to put parentheses around the -8. Otherwise, you will get the wrong answer. That's not going to be good. All right, so 64 minus, again, I'm writing minus, so I have to treat that 4 as positive. So 4 times 2 times -5. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is, 8 times -5 is -40. Okay? So inside I have 64 minus -40. And that's over, I'm just going to make my life simple there. 2 times 2, which is 4. All right, let's continue simplifying. So x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root. 64 plus 40 is 104. And that's divided by 4. So 104 I know is not a perfect square, but I know that 104 is divisible by 4, which is a perfect square. So let's see, if I divide 104 by 4, I get 26, and there are no more perfect squares in 26 because the factors of 26 are 2 and 13. 2 is not a perfect square, 13 is not a perfect square. So I have 4 times 26, right? So I have x is equal to 8 plus or minus. So remember, I said that was 4 times 26. Take the square root of 4 out. I get 2 radical 26 over 4. So I could divide everything by 2, right? And I get 4, and then just the square root of 26 over 2. Because remember, that's 8 divided by 4 and 2 radical 26 divided by 4. So when I break that up, I get x is equal to 8 plus 2 radical 26 over 4. And if I simplify that further, I'm going to just divide everything by 2 because that's the smallest, the least common multiple here, right? So I get 4 plus radical 26 over 2. Now you cannot simplify the 4 and the 2. Ooh, sorry. You cannot simplify the 4 and the 2 here because that's 4 plus radical 26. Okay, so that's one answer. And then your second answer, I'm going to come over here. We have 8 minus 2 radical 26 over 4, which then simplifies to 4 minus radical 26 over 2. So it does not matter if you write that as, so if you did this further and you did 2 minus radical 26 divided by 2, you can write them either way. They mean the same thing. It's just a preference. Okay? Alrighty. So that's example 3. We did example 2 and example 1. So I think we are good. So if you need to see more examples, or maybe you're struggling on simplifying radicals, or the fraction part, or how did I simplify? How did I reduce? Watch the second video because I'll go a little bit slower through that. I wanted to remind and point out reminders, but we already did that unit, so I didn't want to spend too much time addressing all of that for those of you that don't need it. If you do, and you're like, oh, I need a refresher, I don't remember, then go to the next video because I'll walk through those 4 examples a little bit slower and explain the simplifying process a little bit more. All right, guys, you know where to find me. If you have questions, don't forget the study guide is up on Google Classroom and you have a quiz next Monday. All righty, guys, I will be around. You know how to get to me if you have any questions, and I will see you soon. Bye.